Okay, so in this video, I wanted to talk about the origins, like take a deeper dive into the origins of how someone becomes a narcissist, how someone becomes a sociopath or a psychopath. So, with someone with narcissistic personality disorder, it's often a mixture of genetic predispositions and environmental factors, such as them having inconsistent parenting, excessive praise, child childhood trauma that fosters an inflated yet fragile self-image. However, with psychopaths, they're, like I said before, they're part of the antisocial personality disorder cluster, and they are typically made through adverse environments like experiencing abuse, neglect, or poverty, which disrupts the social bonding and their impulse control. And then psychopaths, however, are born with strong genetic and neurobiological components, including abnormalities in the brain regions like the amygdala, which is involved in fear and empathy, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision making and impulse regulation. So, there are studies that suggest that psychopaths may have reduced gray matter in these areas, which is a leading cause of emotional detachment from birth or early infancy, whereas sociopaths can develop those traits as a result of their environment. The interesting thing is that psychopaths affect about 1% or make up about 1% of the general population. However, they make up 20 to 30% of the prison population, which that really doesn't surprise me, but it is interesting that the smallest percentage of the general population makes up a large portion of the prison population. And then sociopaths are more common, which they average about 3 to 4% overall of the general population. And then narcissistic personality disorder impacts between 1 to 6% with higher rates in clinical or high achieving environments. So the neurological and behavioral nuances amongst the three is that it, ex- it is expressed neurologically. Having trouble with words. But narcissists can or probably exhibit cold empathy, which means that they can understand other emotions. They can understand that other people have emotions, but cognitively, they can't feel them. Sorry, I said that wrong. So they can cognitively understand emotions, but they can't feel them. So they can understand why at a funeral someone would be crying, but they themselves would not feel that emotion. And they might cry because it's the thing to do at a funeral. That's what people expect you to do at a funeral. And it also gets them attention, but it's not because they actually feel it. It's just because, again, it's an attention seeking behavior. But this does allow them to have some relational manipulation without full detachment. But sociopaths are often reactive aggressive due to poor emotional regulation. And some brain scans will reveal that they have a heightened amygdala response to stress, but like a blunted sense when it comes to others' pain. And then psychopaths display proactive aggression with consistently low autonomic arousal. For example, there is no increased heart rate during stress, which enables them to be calm and have predatory behavior. And like I said, with impulsivity, narcissists prioritize their self image above all. They have to preserve that no matter what. So, more than likely, they're not going to be impulsive. Sociopaths are highly impulsive, and they often have frequent legal troubles, or a lot of job instability. And then psychopaths are methodical planners. So they're often able to evade detection in corporate or criminal pursuits. And like I've discussed before in the dark triads, this is what kind of this is the ball of personality disorders. Well, the dark triad is the narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and then a fourth one, which is sometimes called the dark tetrad, is sadism. And all these personality types overlap into one. And like I keep saying, the best example I can think of is Tasmanian Devil. For those of you who used to or remember that cartoon back in the day, but he would just like it was a whirlwind of destruction everywhere he went, and that's the best image I can think of to portray what this combination of personality types is like. So the core driving factor for a narcissist is admiration and validation. That's literally why they do any and everything. They want to be validated and they want to be admired because their ego is so fragile. But it can lead to rage when they're criticized, even if it's the teeniest bit of criticism. Sociopaths are made, they seek immediate gratification and they exploit simply for power or the thrill, and it's often very chaotic. And then psychopaths, typically born, and these people pursue goals coldly and exploit systematically for gain with no emotional ties whatsoever. Then the emotional capacity for all three of these, narcissists can feel shame and envy and can feel remorse if it affects their self image. If it doesn't, there's no remorse. Sociopaths have limited bonds, and they are reactive to guilt when it overrides impulsivity. And then psychopaths have no remorse, no emotional bonds, and they mimic emotions strategically when it is convenient for them and when it benefits them or they are able to advance in some type of way. Narcissists are very good at masking socially, so they often appear to be arrogant and they will put themselves in places around high status circles to make them appear to be successful when they're really not. So, an example of this would be Miranda Priestley. If you ever seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada, she would fit in this personality category. Sociopaths, they're very erratic, antisocial. They struggle to maintain the facade. Um, and this could be, you could pinpoint like this in some gang leaders who are influenced by their upbringing. And then psychopaths are able to seamlessly integrate. They're very charming, professional. And if you have ever seen the movie American Psycho, the main character would fit into this category. And one of the most famous serial killers that's very charming is Ted Bundy. Narcissists, like I said before, rarely result in physical or resort to physical violence. They typically do the more covert violence or more covert actions such as gaslighting, sabotaging, and typically have low criminality. Sociopaths, however, are again very impulsive and they have higher arrest rates because they don't plan. They just do. And then they think about it later. But it's their behavior is very erratic. However, psychopaths have calculated violence, and if it is beneficial to them evading capture, and they typically would be found more in white collar crimes. Then the societal impacts of these personality types. So narcissists, being in a relationship with a narcissist